The Anglo Zanzibar War took place on August 27, 1896, and is widely known as the shortest war ever recorded, lasting somewhere between 38 and 45 minutes depending on the account. Despite its brief duration, the conflict was the result of years of political tension, imperial ambition, and shifting power in East Africa, particularly involving the British Empire and the strategically important island of Zanzibar. By the late 19th century, Zanzibar had become a key trading hub for spices, ivory, and formerly enslaved people, making it highly valuable to European powers seeking influence along the East African coast. Britain had already established a protectorate over Zanzibar, which meant that while the Sultan remained a local ruler, real political power increasingly rested with British officials. The immediate cause of the war began with the death of Sultan Hamad bin Thawani, who had ruled in alignment with British interests. His sudden death on August 25, 1896 created a power vacuum. Almost immediately, his cousin Khalid bin Barghash moved to seize the palace and declare himself the new sultan. This action directly challenged British authority because, under existing agreements, any new ruler required British approval. Khalid had attempted a similar seizure of power in 1893 but had been forced to step aside under pressure, so his return to the throne was seen as a deliberate act of defiance. The British consul in Zanzibar, Basil Cave, quickly responded by warning Khalid that his claim to the throne would not be recognized. Instead, the British supported another candidate, Hamad bin Muhammad, who was considered more cooperative and willing to follow British guidance. Khalid refused to step down, believing he could rally enough local support to resist British interference. He gathered approximately 2,800 supporters, which included palace guards, armed civilians, and a few artillery pieces. These forces fortified the palace complex, which was largely constructed of wood and therefore highly vulnerable to bombardment. At the same time, the British began preparing for military action. Several warships were already present in the harbor, including the cruisers HMS St. George, HMS Philomel, HMS Raccoon, and the gunboats HMS Thrush and HMS Sparrow. These vessels were equipped with modern naval artillery, far superior to anything Khalid's forces possessed. British Marines and sailors were also landed to support operations on shore, though the plan relied primarily on naval firepower to quickly resolve the situation. An ultimatum was issued to Khalid, giving him until 9 o'clock in the morning on August 27th to leave the palace and relinquish his claim. Khalid responded by strengthening his position rather than negotiating, reportedly believing that the British would not follow through with a full attack. This miscalculation proved decisive. When the deadline expired without compliance, the British forces opened fire almost immediately. The bombardment was swift and devastating. The palace buildings were quickly set ablaze as shells tore through the wooden structures. Zanzibar's artillery attempted to respond but was largely ineffective, both due to inferior equipment and lack of training. Within minutes, most of Khalid's defensive capability had been neutralized. The palace grounds became chaotic, with defenders fleeing or being struck by artillery fire. The Sultan's flag was eventually shot down, which was traditionally a signal of surrender, although the fighting continued briefly afterward. Zanzibar's small naval presence consisted mainly of the royal yacht HHS Glasgow, which had been armed in an attempt to defend the harbor. It engaged British ships but was rapidly overwhelmed and sunk after sustaining heavy damage. This further demonstrated the imbalance of power between the two sides. The British Navy's technological superiority ensured that resistance could not be sustained for long. Casualties on the Zanzibari side were significant, with estimates often placing the number of killed and wounded at around 500. In contrast, British forces suffered remarkably few losses, with only one sailor reported injured. This stark difference highlighted not only the brevity of the conflict but also the overwhelming disparity in military capability. Within less than an hour, the war had effectively ended. During the chaos, Khalid bin Barghash managed to escape from the palace and sought refuge in the German consulate. Germany, which also had colonial interests in East Africa, provided him protection, preventing the British from capturing him immediately. This created a brief diplomatic tension between Britain and Germany, although it did not escalate into further conflict. Eventually, Khalid was allowed to leave and was later exiled to German East Africa, where he lived for several years before being captured by British forces during the First World War. Following the end of the conflict, the British quickly moved to install their preferred candidate, Hamad bin Muhammad, as the new sultan. His rule marked a period of increased British control over Zanzibar's internal affairs. Although the Sultanate continued to exist in name, it functioned largely under British direction. One of the notable outcomes of this period was the strengthening of policies aligned with British interests, including efforts to suppress the slave trade, which had long been a central part of Zanzibar's economy. The war itself became a powerful symbol of what is often called gunboat diplomacy, a practice in which naval power is used to achieve political objectives without prolonged conflict. The speed and decisiveness of the British victory demonstrated how industrial-era military technology could determine the outcome of disputes almost instantly when faced with less advanced opposition. It also reflected the broader context of the scramble for Africa, during which European powers competed to establish control over territories across the continent. Beyond its immediate military outcome, the Anglo Zanzibar War had lasting political and cultural implications. It reinforced British dominance in the region and signaled to other local rulers the consequences of resisting imperial authority. It also contributed to the gradual transformation of Zanzibar's political system, reducing the autonomy of the Sultan and integrating the territory more firmly into the British imperial network. The event has remained historically notable not because of its scale, but because of its extreme brevity and the clarity with which it illustrates the imbalance of power during the colonial period. It is often cited in discussions of military history as an example of how quickly a conflict can be decided when one side possesses overwhelming technological and organizational advantages. At the same time, it serves as a reminder of the human cost of even the shortest wars, as hundreds of lives were affected in less than an hour. In retrospect, the decisions made by Khalid bin Barghash appear shaped by a mix of ambition, misjudgment, and the complex political environment of the time. His attempt to assert independence from British control was not unusual in principle, but the manner in which it was carried out placed him in direct confrontation with a global power at the height of its influence. The British response, while swift and effective, also reflected a broader pattern of intervention that defined their imperial strategy. Today, the Anglo Zanzibar War continues to capture attention due to its unique place in history. It is frequently discussed in educational settings and popular history as a striking example of how global politics, local leadership struggles, and military technology intersected in a single dramatic moment. Though it lasted less than an hour, its causes and consequences extend far beyond that brief period, offering insight into the dynamics of empire, resistance, and change in the late 19th century.